Jamal Sweet Dreams Hill will be the next light heavyweight champion and defeat Alex Pereira at UFC 300, and I carry that opinion with one important caveat that I will get to later. Now make no mistake, Jamahal Hill is walking into the most difficult fight that he has ever had, and I don't expect anything about this to be easy for him, but I definitely believe he has the right set of skills to get this job done. So in this video, we're going to look at the strengths and weaknesses for each of these guys as well as their keys to victory. And at the end of all that, I'm going to give you my final prediction, and we're going to take a look at some of the betting odds to see what's possible from that standpoint. And as always, all the parts that I'm going to cover are timestamped down in the progress bar in case you need to jump around. So with that out of the way, why do I think Jamahal Hill is going to win this fight? Well, it comes down to the fact that Jamahal Hill has some of the key characteristics that will do well against a style like Alex Pereira. And while Alex Pereira definitely deserves the success that he's had and the fan base that he's developed, there are some holes in his game that can definitely be taken advantage of. So let's start off here by going through Alex Pereira's strengths and weaknesses as well as his keys to victory. Few people in the history of the UFC have had the type of meteoric rise that Alex Pereira has had. And like I said earlier, much of that is deserved, but at the same time, I think he has also had a lot of relatively favorable style fights. And with the exception of Yuri Prochazka, who is a more unorthodox type striker, very wild, the majority of the opponents that Alex Pereira has had so far are technical strikers. And because Alex Pereira is literally one of the best in the world at being a technical striker, it's not really a surprise that he's had so much success against them. But what we haven't seen so far are a lot of matchups with guys who are going to push the boundaries of his skill set. And what I mean by that is we haven't seen him match up against too many unorthodox style strikers, and we haven't seen him against any really dominant wrestlers either. But from everything we know about him, we can pick out some distinct strengths and weaknesses. And to start off with, we have to cover his two biggest weapons, which are his left hook and his leg kicks. These are the two things that Alex Pereira does exceptionally well that even when people know about it, they still have a hard time avoiding. Alex Pereira is perhaps the best calf kicker in all of MMA, and the amount of damage and disabling he can do with that is pretty incredible. But outside of those two obvious strengths, the other things that come into play for Alex Pereira are things like his experience and his aura in general. There's definitely a widely held sentiment that Alex Pereira is a scary guy to fight. And for his opponents that are susceptible to that sort of thing, that can be a big factor in Alex's favor. Now, when it comes to Alex Pereira's weaknesses, there are multiple things that his opponents can take advantage of. The most obvious of all is that his grappling is mostly defensive in nature, and he's definitely not known for any sort of offensive skill there. So I do think when the day comes that he fights somebody who is a heavy, strong, and dominant grappler, I think Alex Pereira is going to be in a lot of trouble in that regard. Also, when you watch Pereira's fights, he tends to be most dangerous when people are just standing square with him in the feeling out process. That's when he's able to accumulate a lot of that damage to the legs with the calf kicks. But where Pereira seems to be vulnerable is when you put pressure on him to move him backwards, or when you let him come in and get overconfident. In those cases, in his fights, he tends to be much more hittable. In both of his fights with Adesanya, Pereira got overconfident coming in on Izzy, and that's where Izzy almost finished him at the very end of the first round in their first fight, and then in their second fight, Izzy knocked him out cold, obviously, by tricking Pereira into thinking he was hurt so that Pereira would come in, and that's when Izzy knew he would be vulnerable. If you watch Pereira's fight with Yuri Prochazka, in the second round, Yuri was pressuring Alex a lot more than he was in the first round, and he was being much more effective at actually getting to Alex. But Alex did show he's still obviously very dangerous moving backwards. He still has a great counter. You have to be aware of that. But nonetheless, he does tend to be hittable in that situation. Now, outside of those particular openings, I think one of the other questions we have to look at is how is Alex's chin going to hold up? Alex does not have a granite chin, and he gets rocked a lot in his fights. At least that was true when he was fighting at lower weights, and we haven't really seen that tested now that he's up at 205. Now, to his credit, he was able to avoid taking any heavy shots when he fought both Yuri and Blachowicz. So it does have to be said that Alex's general defense is pretty good, but I do want to see how his chin holds up when he does eventually take a shot from someone at 205. So now that we've covered Alex's strengths and weaknesses, let's go into those of Jamahal Hill. One of the most important strengths that I think he's going to have in this fight is the fact that he's pretty good everywhere. Jamahal Hill should be able to take this fight wherever he wants it to go, so if he finds himself getting into trouble on the feet, he can always change it up and try to take him down. But based on his past fights and everything he said in the lead up to this fight, I'm pretty sure Jamahal Hill wants to try to take Alex out on the feet, and I don't think anybody should be sleeping on the fact that he can do it. While Jamahal Hill's striking can sometimes look slow and other times look sloppy, I really don't think that it is. And though you can say he leaves himself open a lot, and some people have pointed that out coming into this fight, Jamahal Hill definitely makes himself very difficult to hit. If you look at this sequence right here in the first round when he fought Teixeira, watch Teixeira try to hit him here. Hill does a really beautiful job with his movement and making any sort of solid impact really difficult. And then in this next sequence right after it, you can see that Teixeira throws at him multiple times and Hill is able to evade every single one of them. So the fact of the matter is he does a really great job at evading even though he looks like he is hittable. The other thing that I think Hill does really well is distance management. He doesn't quite have a Wonder Boy style karate stance, but he has something in between. And he does a really great job of keeping himself out of range unless it's on his terms. Although he does leave his legs exposed to leg kicks a lot of times, and that could be a real problem when it comes to somebody like Alex. Now, from a durability standpoint, Jamal Hill seems to have a pretty solid chin, and when you watch some of the exchanges in the Teixeira fight, where Glover did connect with him, it looked like Jamal took those punches pretty well, didn't really hurt him that much. But as Jamal gets tired, he does become a lot more hittable, so that is something to be concerned with in this fight. But one of the other great things that Jamal Hill has is a really solid fight IQ, and I do trust that he will know where he needs to take the fight and when he needs to do it. When it comes to power, Jamal Hill absolutely has finishing power, but he doesn't necessarily have scary power. I would sort of put him in the same camp as Adesanya in that regard. But if we're talking about whether or not he has enough power to put away Alex if he catches him, he absolutely does. And finally, one of the biggest strengths that I think Jamal Hill has is his mentality. He is not the kind of guy who's going to be intimidated by the aura of Alex. And he's also not somebody who gets nervous prior to fights. He actually gets excited if you listen to him. So I think that's going to be a really powerful weapon when you're going up against somebody who is thought of to be so scary as Alex is. If you can avoid being affected by that, that's a big advantage. But with all that out of the way, the biggest X factor with Jamal Hill is the status of his injury. When I watched the video of Tim Welch talking about himself having that same injury and his road to recovery from it, it certainly seems like Jamal Hill is probably coming back too early. But on the other hand, we know he's had access to the best doctors and the best treatments after the fact. But at the end of the day, only he and his doctors really know what the story is. So that is the one primary thing that gives me pause when picking Hill in this fight. But I'm sticking with that pick on the basis that he knows best whether or not he's ready to return. So now that we've covered all of their strengths and weaknesses, let's go through the things that I think would be the keys to victory for each guy. When it comes to Pereira, I think the game plan for him is pretty simple, and it really comes down to just doing what he does best with a bit more patience. When he gets in situations where he has somebody hurt, he tends to rush in and leave himself exposed, and against a guy like Hill, that could be a bad night. That's exactly what happened to him at the end of the first round in the first Adesanya fight, and it's also how Adesanya finished him in their second fight. The other thing I'm certain is going to be a big piece of Pereira's game is to chop Hill's legs. Even if Hill's injury is fully healed, Alex Pereira will be able to soften that right back up if Hill allows him to. So like I said, I think the game plan for Pereira is pretty simple overall, and it really comes down to taking Hill's legs out and choosing his other shots wisely without getting reckless. If Alex is able to do that, I could imagine him getting a 4th or 5th round finish at the point where Hill's mobility is greatly restricted. And even if he isn't able to put Hill away, he could certainly still win on points. Moving over now to Jamal Hill, there are two things that are really obvious for him. The first is that whatever approach he decides to take with the stand-up, he cannot leave his legs out there and exposed like he did against Teixeira. So whatever game plan Hill has, it needs to protect his legs. And whether that means he's just light on his feet and bouncing around more, or just makes a conscious effort to not be so heavy on his front foot, this is probably the most important thing he can possibly do in this fight. The other thing that's really important for him is to avoid putting himself in a situation where he's going to be exposed to that clean left hook. Hill is very good at avoiding taking clean hits when he's fresh, but as he gets more tired, he tends to get hit a bit more. So when he gets into those modes where he darts in with attacks, which I think will be a good strategy for him, he just needs to be sure that he doesn't leave himself fully exposed. Now, from an offensive perspective, I think there are a lot of things that Hill can do to put the odds in his favor in this fight. And the first thing I would say in that regard is to keep Pereira out of his comfort zone. Of all the places that Pereira likes to be, he doesn't necessarily like to be moving backwards. And in the times where we've seen that happening, he's been hittable. So not only would that give Jamal the ability to go in and hit him, but it would also make it harder for Alex to leg kick him effectively. Also, I think it would really be stupid if he's prideful and doesn't want to grapple just because he wants to beat Alex on the feet. One of the best ways that he can nullify Alex in this fight is if he makes Alex think he'll take him down if he throws too many kicks or puts himself out there. Jamal does have the more diverse capability set and he should use it. So if I was charged with coming up with the game plan for Hill in this fight, it would first be to deploy a lot of movement in order to make him a harder target. On top of that, it would involve a lot of the darting in style attacks that Hill likes to do naturally anyway, as those would help put Pereira on his back foot where we want him. And finally, I would throw in takedowns where possible, just to keep it in Alex's mind that we can take him down whenever we want to. I think if Hill deploys that sort of a game plan, he will be able to dart in, connect with Pereira, put him in danger, and give him enough concern that he can never get his own game plan going. So with all that said, let's go over my thoughts for the outcome of this fight and take a look at some of the odds and some of the interesting opportunities that are there. From the time I started planning and making this video until now, Hill has shifted from a slight underdog into a slight favorite. And what I think is starting to happen there is that people are starting to realize how dangerous Jamahal Hill is and how his style is a good potential matchup against Alex Pereira. But like I said earlier, if we look at the breakdown of this fight, I think the first half favors Jamahal Hill and the second half favors Alex Pereira, especially if Alex is able to damage the legs. So I have to believe that Jamahal Hill knows his best chance in this fight is to get it done early, so I'm going for a Jamahal Hill by TKO victory. And while I really don't care where he gets it done, I think his best shot at getting it done is within the first 3 rounds. So whether you agree with that or you're in the camp of Alex winning, let's take a look at some of the betting opportunities that are enticing. I think a TKO for Jamahal Hill, which is probably the most likely way that he would win, at plus 180 is pretty attractive. It's interesting because if you look at Alex Pereira, he's actually favored more so to win by TKO than Jamahal Hill, at only plus 120. Also, if you think this fight could go to decision, and it absolutely could, then doing a double chance bet could make a lot of sense. In my case, picking Jamahal Hill, I could get him winning by TKO or decision for plus 120. And if I really wanted to get aggressive, I could even choose by round, because Jamahal Hill winning in the first, second, or third round all bring great odds. He's at plus 500 for winning in the first round, 800 for the second, and 1100 for the third. And I do think if he wins, those are the most likely rounds. And again, if you're in the camp of Alex Pereira, you can do something similar. And even though he is showing as the slight underdog, it's interesting because his by the round odds are a little worse than those of Jamahal Hill. But for example, if you do think that Alex Pereira is going to finish Jamahal Hill late in the fight, if you go 4th round or 5th round, you're talking plus 1600 for the 4th round and 2500 for the 5th. Now, I'm sure these lines will continue to shift as we get closer to the fight, but that's at least what they are at the time I'm making this. So not only are there some great opportunities for me to place my bets on Hill, but I can also even do some hedging on Pereira with him winning late in the fight and possibly still come out ahead even if I'm wrong about Jamahal Hill winning. So that's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more in the future. Also, please join the discussion. Let me know what you think about this fight down in the comments. Who do you have winning? Do you agree with me about Jamahal Hill being able to pull this off, or do you think I'm crazy? As always, I will look forward to hearing what you have to say. And until next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and week.